At 72 years old, I signed the papers that sold the only house I'd ever really loved. 31 years in that house. 31 years of birthdays, holidays, ordinary Tuesday mornings gone in about 11 minutes at a title company in Phoenix. The realtor handed me a pen I signed where she pointed. And just like that, the life I'd built was somebody else's. Now I drove home that afternoon to an apartment I didn't recognize as mine. Yet boxes stacked against walls that weren't the right color. And I remember thinking, this is either the bravest thing I've ever done or the last mistake I'll ever get to make 6 years earlier. I'd buried my husband, Walter. 38 years of marriage ended on a Tuesday in a hospital hallway that smelled like disinfectant and vending machine coffee. After that, the house got quiet, in a way houses aren't supposed to be. I kept working, selling real estate in Phoenix, driving other people through other people's dream homes, coming back every evening to a kitchen table set for one. We never had children. It wasn't a choice we regretted, not exactly. But it meant that when Walter died, there was no one waiting up for me, no grandchild's soccer game to distract me on a Saturday, just me, my clients, and a house full of furniture arranged for 2 people. I told myself I was fine. I was the strong one, everyone said, so the friend who checked in on other widows rather than the one who needed checking on. But somewhere around year 5, I noticed I'd stopped making plans past dinner. I'd stopped buying green bananas. If you understand what I mean by that, it wasn't depression, not the kind with a name, it was something quieter, a slow leak in the tire of my life that I kept meaning to deal with and never did. It was my niece who mentioned the Philippines first. She'd seen a video. Some retiree living comfortably on a fraction of what he'd spent in the States, beaches, warm weather, people who smiled at strangers. I laughed it off at dinner, told her I was too old to start over anywhere. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I opened my laptop at 11 p.m., told myself I was just curious. 3 hours later, it was 2 in the morning, and I had 11 browser tabs open about a city called Cebu. I want to be honest about why I actually decided to go. It wasn't courage, not really. It was arithmetic. My Social Security check and my small pension covered my bills in Phoenix, barely every year. The number stretched a little thinner, and every year I got a little more tired of stretching it. A woman in an online forum, someone I'd never met, said her entire monthly budget in Cebu was less than what I paid for property taxes alone. That got my attention more than any beach ever could. So I did what I do best. I researched 3 months of spreadsheets, visa requirements, cost of living calculators. I told my 2 closest friends over coffee. One of them said, "Eleanor, you're 72, not 22, I said. That's exactly why I'm doing it now. And not in 10 years, the house sold faster than I expected. The furniture went to an estate sale, most of 31 years, fit into 4 suitcases, which tells you something about what actually matters and what doesn't. The flight was 18 hours with a layover in Tokyo. By the time I landed in Cebu, I hadn't slept properly in 2 days, and the heat hit me before I'd even reached the taxi stand, thick, wet heat that settled onto my skin like a wet towel, the kind Phoenix never has. For all its dry oven summers, the taxi ride into the city was its own kind of shock. Motorcycles carrying entire families, 3 and 4 to a bike jeepneys, packed past what looked like any reasonable capacity horns as a form of conversation rather than alarm. I gripped my purse the whole ride like I'd landed on a different planet rather than a different country. The condo I'd rented sight unseen looked smaller in person and louder, so much louder, a karaoke bar. 2 buildings over that apparently never closed. Not once, not ever that first night. I sat on the edge of an unfamiliar bed, in an unfamiliar country 12 time zones from anyone who knew my name, and I did something I hadn't done since Walter's funeral. I cried until I couldn't anymore. The first week was a blur of small humiliations. I got lost trying to find a grocery store 4 blocks away. I paid triple the local price for a fan because I didn't know how to bargain and didn't know that I was supposed to. A shopkeeper laughed, not unkindly, when I tried to speak the 2 Cebuano phrases I'd memorized. I missed things I never thought I'd miss: my own shower, my own bed, the particular quiet of my own street. I missed being someone who knew how things worked, instead of someone who had to ask. By the second week, the loneliness had a shape. It sat with me at breakfast. It followed me to the market. It climbed into bed with me at night. I'd built a whole life around being capable, being the one others leaned on, and here I was, unable to work a washing machine with instructions only in a language I didn't read. Then came the man who called himself Ramon. I met him at a coffee shop near my condo. He was polished, spoke excellent English, said he'd helped dozens of American retirees find property. He showed me photographs of a small beachfront lot, told me the price was only available if I decided that week. Foreigner-friendly ownership structure. He called it a local partner. Papers he'd have translated for me. I wanted so badly to belong to something here, to prove to my friends back home, and mostly to myself, that this had been the right decision. So 17 days after landing in Cebu, I wired $8,000 to an account. Ramon provided a deposit, he called it, to secure the lot before someone else did. I told myself I was building something. I told myself this was the beginning of my new life. 3 days later, Ramon stopped answering his phone. The coffee shop where we'd met said they'd never heard of him, the property. When I finally found someone who could translate the paperwork, turned out to belong to a family who had no idea it was being sold. I sat in my small, loud condo and did the math on what I had left. It wasn't nothing, but it was frighteningly close to it. I felt exactly as foolish as my friend back home had warned me I'd feel. 72 years old and swindled like a child. That night, I opened my laptop not to research Cebu this time, but to look at flights home. I found one 4 days out, the earliest seat available in my price range. I booked it without letting myself think twice. I told myself I'd tried. I told myself some people simply aren't built for reinvention. At 72, I called my friend Carol back in Phoenix and told her I was coming home. She didn't say "I told you so," though she'd have been entitled to. She just said, "Come home, we'll get you back on your feet." I spent those 4 days doing what I'd done. In the weeks after Walter died, going through the motions, packing suitcases I'd barely unpacked, telling myself the Philippines had simply not been my chapter. On my last full day, I went for one final walk, not because I wanted to see anything, but because staying inside that condo felt unbearable. I ended up near a small barangay basketball court where a group of elderly women sat on plastic chairs under a mango tree, fanning themselves, laughing at something I couldn't understand. One of them noticed me standing there and waved me over. I almost kept walking. I had exactly 1 day left. Why start a conversation I couldn't finish? But something made me stop. Maybe it was that I had nothing left to lose. Her name was Lita. She was 79. She spoke English carefully, the way people do when they learned it in school decades ago and rarely practice. She asked why an American woman was walking alone, looking, in her words, like someone at a funeral. I don't know why I told her the truth. Maybe because I'd never see her again. I told her about Walter, about the house, about Ramon, about the flight home tomorrow. She listened without interrupting. the way so few people do anymore. When I finished, she didn't offer sympathy. She asked a question instead. She asked, "Did you come here to hide or to live?" I didn't have an answer. She told me that when her own husband died, she'd wanted to disappear into her grief and never come out. What saved her wasn't a decision she made once. It was 100 small decisions made on 100 separate mornings to sit under this same mango tree with these same women. One more time, she said, the mistake wasn't coming to Cebu. The mistake was expecting Cebu to fix in 3 weeks. What took years to break. Then she said something I've thought about every day since. She said, "A stranger stole your money. Don't let him steal your last chance too." I walked back to my condo that evening and didn't sleep. Not from grief this time, but from something closer to indecision. At 5 in the morning, 3 hours before my flight, I called the airline. I don't fully know what made me do it. Maybe it was arithmetic again, the same instinct that got me here in the first place. I had enough left for perhaps 4 more months. If I was careful, I decided 4 months was enough time to find out if Lita was right. I canceled the flight and lost the fare entirely. It felt, strangely, like the first fully mine decision I'd made since Walter died. The next morning, I went back to that basketball court. Lita was there, unsurprised to see me, as if she'd expected it. She introduced me to the other women, invited me to join them for breakfast. Rice and dried fish I'd never have chosen for myself, and didn't dislike as much as I'd assumed I would over the following weeks. Those mornings became a routine. I learned a handful of Cebuano words, badly, and they laughed at my pronunciation the way family laughs, not the way strangers do. I learned which market stalls wouldn't overcharge me, and which ones expected to be bargained with. Cheerfully, as a kind of local sport, I reported Ramon to the local police, filed what paperwork existed. I never saw my $8,000 again, but I stopped checking my email every hour, hoping it would reappear. Lita's granddaughter was studying to be a nurse and struggling with her English coursework one afternoon. Lita asked if I might help her practice. I said yes before I'd fully thought it through. That one afternoon became twice a week, then 3 times. Then somehow I was tutoring 4 of her granddaughter's classmates too, sitting at a plastic table under that same mango tree correcting essays, listening to nervous girls practice job interview answers. I recognized something in their determination, the same thing I'd recognized in myself decades earlier, building a career out of nothing but persistence. 4 months turned into 6. 6 turned into a year. My daughter, if I'd had one, might have asked what exactly I was doing with my life. Instead, it was Carol, calling from Phoenix, asking almost the same question. I didn't have an impressive answer for her either. The truth was smaller than that, and more honest. I told her I'd stopped waking up and wondering how to fill the day. I found myself waking up, wondering who I'd see under the mango tree, what the market vendor's sick daughter's fever was doing today, whether Lita's granddaughter had passed her nursing exam somewhere in that year. The loneliness that had followed me from Phoenix to Cebu quietly packed its own bags and left it. Wasn't the ocean that did it, though I do love the ocean here. It wasn't the warm weather, though my joints certainly prefer it to Phoenix winters. It was a group of women on plastic chairs who decided, without asking anything in return, that a foolish, swindled American widow was worth including. I still think about the flight I almost took. I think about how close I came to landing back in Phoenix, telling everyone I'd tried something bold, and it hadn't worked out quietly, returning to a life I already understood, and had already grown tired of. I don't know what would have happened if Lita hadn't waved me over that afternoon. Maybe I'd have found my way back regardless. Maybe I wouldn't have. What I do know is this: At 72, I thought I was traveling to the Philippines. Looking back, I wasn't. Not really. I was traveling toward a version of myself that had gone quiet somewhere in the years after Walter died. The woman who could sit with strangers and end up feeling like family, who could lose $8,000 to a con man and still decide the story wasn't over. Some mornings, I still miss my old street in Phoenix. I miss Walter every single day. That never really stops, and I've made peace with that. But when I wake up now and hear roosters instead of traffic, when I walk to that mango tree and see Lita already there, saving me a chair, I know exactly where I want to be. And that feeling took me 72 years, one swindle, and one canceled flight to find.